I've looked into the thermite side of it, and I'll be the first one to admit that, like yourself, I was pretty much, I basically said, okay, it looks like thermite, it might have been involved, and knowing a little bit about explosives, these diagonal cut beams look very much like the work of shaped charges and what have you. What would you say to people in that who haven't had the chance to look at all the material?
You're going to take out a saw and cut down the building?
Well, yeah, it doesn't make sense, does it? But
yeah. But if you were able to cut through the building, how you bust up the building is you cut it off its foundation and slam it to the ground. There's no seismic signal that indicates it was slammed to the ground.
Well, it doesn't explain why it did. I mean, the most compelling argument I can see, just on bear in mind I've only had a week to research this, is that you can plainly see that the buildings turn to dust and then fall to the ground. Now, if you demolish a building, you can watch 1,000 of them on YouTube. When you blow a building up, you collapse the building, and the building is demolished by it hitting the ground, essentially. They almost always collapse intact, except at the interface where it's hitting the ground, and that's where the rubble and that is created. From the 9/11 footage, that isn't happening, nor is this pancake effect that everybody talked about in the official version, where you would clearly be able to see a process of slamming as they went down. That's not the case. It turns to dust.
I've got another easy one. Is when the dust cloud went up, and it went up. That doesn't happen in controlled demolitions. It went up so much, and it was so fine that it blocked out 100% of the sunlight. And the first responders say it was pitch black. You couldn't see anything. Until, thank goodness, this car just went into spontaneous combustion. Then we had light.
Just happened to spontaneously combust by being covered in ordinary dust, did it?
No, they just were, because of whatever energy field. The cars are just lighting up, all over. Yeah. But think of that much dust going up to the point 100% sunlight is blocked out.
Yeah.
This is it. All these things.
Ring of truth at all, does it?
I noticed somebody's asked about the explosions, and so people have been shown these other little Easter eggs like the squibs coming out, the explosive squibs, which are claimed to be the demolition explosives going off. We've got the Rodriguez story in the basement of him being in the basement when these bombs went off. Various other accounts of explosions. But actually, if you go and re-listen to the majority of the witness accounts, actually describe explosions or explosive sounds, not bombs. And Dr. Judy's used this analogy: if you put an egg in a microwave oven and switch the microwave oven on, you'll hear an explosion sound after a couple of minutes or whatever. Does that mean that the egg is a bomb? Exactly. So what? Go ahead. I was just going to mention about the, what we think the explosives. Yeah, the explosives sounds. We've got witness accounts from what are called the first responders, the firemen and the emergency medical people who went to the towers. They had what were called exploding Scott packs on the fire trucks outside the buildings. In other words, these oxygen tanks were actually exploding. I think just before one of the towers came down, or in between. Yeah,
they were on the fire trucks. Yeah, just extra oxygen tanks or air tanks.
Right.
And
so there's many explanations for apparently explosion sounds.
Absolutely, but in the actual building themselves, if people are coming down the stairwells and hearing these explosions going off, if we've got these pressurized tanks exploding, what are you going to find in stairwells? Well, you're going to find things like fire extinguishers, which are pressurized tanks. So if you've got this process which is jellifying the metal or weakening the metal at the very least, happening throughout the towers prior to the actual, dustification, then you're going to be affecting the metal in the walls of these fire extinguishers. So when they're pressurized, they're going to explode. So that is certainly one explanation I would give for the explosive sounds. And there were other pressurized tanks in the turbo toilets as well. They have pressurized tanks in them, in the various sort of kitchen areas that would have had some type of pressurized tanks and inside freezers or this sort of thing. So various types of things can have caused these explosive sounds. We don't actually have people being burned, or I don't know of anybody who was burned to any great extent when they heard these explosive sounds. So, it's a very, very complicated picture when you actually get down.
One thing we didn't discuss is the glowing orange stuff.
Right.
Folks like to say is molten metal. Well, the digger that's holding the glowing thing, the hydraulics still work, but the one that really captures it is hot thing. I like to say hot things can glow, but not everything that glows is hot. Right. Because you have an incandescent bulb that glows and it's hot. A fluorescent lamp glows and it's not hot. It's a different process. Yeah. And here we have these things that look like molten metal all over the place, but if you notice, it's sitting on paper.
Yeah.
Paper isn't burning, and these glowing orange things, whatever they are.
Yeah, I've seen a reference to a fireman apparently walking through a sheet of flame at the 9/11 debris site, and even if his equipment is fireproof, radiated heat alone wouldn't have allowed him to be strolling through this stuff. You know what I mean? It's just it stretches the bounds of incredulity, doesn't it? There's a lot of that.
Yeah, like the story about the guys working on the pile whose boots would melt in 2 hours. Right. It was repeated over and over again. Like, wait a minute, if my oven is melting, the turkey inside of it is well done, and there's no reports of burned feet.
No. There's just a lot of that. There's a lot of paper
stuff
floating about. I mean, the whole area is absolutely wick with paper, and yet that whole lot would have been on fire if there was huge amounts of heat in the area. It's just self-evident. Paper spontaneously combusts, doesn't it, if there's a fire anywhere near it? So there's a lot of images that just don't ring true with all this. I know some of our listeners were asking earlier on about the wider questions about all this, particularly in relation to if this was an energy weapon, that opens the door on free energy science and whatnot. Where do you think that's going, and where do you think we're going in terms of this technology and the weapons that they're obviously making out of it?
Well, I'll start first. I encourage people to look at my website, right, because I don't think we're going to get a sponsored government-sponsored institution to study this, but studying it yourself, using your own eyes, open mind, and understanding the phenomena, I think that's our best chance. And if everyone can kind of get their hands on that, we're outside the system. Yeah.
Do you think that we mentioned briefly earlier on about 2012 and these whole things about false alien flag invasions and what have you? I think that links into the issue about the aeroplanes and that. In that.
Yeah, we can touch on that. I mean, I've got a presentation that I do on this where I draw an analogy, and I've got a clip from the 1996 film Independence Day. The film with, I think it was Roland Emmerich's film, as I recall. And there is a particular sequence in that where they show the destruction of the Empire State Building, top down, being blown apart. And I was struck when I thought of this image. I can't remember if I saw it on YouTube or somebody else mentioned this idea to me, of how similar it looked to the World Trade Center being destroyed, whatever it was, 5 years later. Mm-hmm. And so I made this little clip of putting the two side by side, making the point that in the film Independence Day they were, putting this alien invasion as the main theme. And to me, when you put the two things side by side, there's an eerie kind of feeling that you get that the only thing that's different between those two scenes is one is obviously a movie, and with a flying saucer over the building, and the other is real life without a flying saucer over the building. So we can consider that if there is this group who then sort of are beginning to realise that this facade of global terrorism, this fake psychological operation which has been built up over a number of years, is starting to fall apart, they may quote unquote up the ante and go for the alien threat. And this is what Carol Rosin said at the Disclosure Project conference, and I bring that idea in. So I certainly am open to that being put on the table as a possibility, but I think we've also got to take into account the predictive programming that goes on as well, with these sorts of images that are given to us. And curiously, there are some peculiar things that you can find in movies, like there's a Mario Brothers film from 1993 where it actually shows the Twin Towers kind of dissolving. It's only about 4 or 5 seconds long, this clip. Somebody's posted it on YouTube. It's very strange. It's very strange. And I certainly, I'm not so sure if Dr. Judy wants to talk about this much, but I certainly see 9/11 as part of essentially a wider agenda, of what's going on in the world, which has occult aspects to it as well. That somehow plays into this, with the Twin Tower symbolism and the dates and the times and everything, and the other symbolism that people talk about. I certainly don't dismiss that. It's difficult to talk about it in the same way as the forensic study that's been done, but nevertheless, I look at it and I think, there's something going on with this, Yeah,
there's clearly an agenda of perception management in operation,
exactly.
isn't it?
It also seems like when I came out with what I thought happened, and I was very suppressed, trampled on, and whatnot. And then, gradually leak out different things at different times. Like when the Supreme Court denied my case, the next day or the day after was when the, you remember that ABC News Freedom of Information request releases all new photos?
Yeah.
Those were the photos that were in my legal case.
Yeah, there was a report on ABC around about the time of the ruling on the case, which said that these new 9/11 pictures have been discovered in an archive or something, or were being released.
They were Freedom of Information request.
Right, okay, it was a Freedom of Information request. Yeah, these were all the same pictures that have been on Dr. Judy's website for about 3-4 years or something. So
since 2005, I guess.
Yeah. So it was all a bit weird, and we were just kind of sort of stroking our chins over this one, as to what was going on. And this big hoopla, I think they want to control the timing. Okay, now it's okay to look at these pictures. Before it wasn't. Yeah.
And now they've released these videos. Okay, now we're supposed to learn more from the videos. Like they're cluing us in slowly.
Mm.
They don't want people to get ahead of the game.
Mm. Mm. And the whole energy thing as well. I mean, it's a huge issue. And to me, I think, as I said, that we have to realise that this technology is real. It's not a debate. It's not a theory. It's real. You can prove it from the available evidence.
Uh-huh.
Therefore, we have to identify what group is responsible for 9/11. Is it an international group? Does it have connections into these Zionist movements? I don't know, but it's certainly something that. Pardon?
ARA knows. And
exactly.
if that case had gone forward, we would have gotten them under oath.
Yeah, exactly. We can certainly prove the connection, not to those who did it, but those who covered it up. And you would think that because people like ARA are actively covering this up, they probably have some kind of connection to those people who did it. Mm-hmm. So we've at least got a thread we can pull, in future. Yeah. To try and find out more about that. I mean, I think one thing we're going to touch on earlier was the potential of using this weapon again. And back in 2007, I'd heard a lecture by Stephen E. Jones in where was it? Was it in Seattle, Judy?
Vancouver.
Jones, Vancouver, wasn't it? Yeah, that's right, Vancouver. And we'd had Stephen E. Jones saying, "Oh well, we're just putting a warning out here, that if there's a nuclear attack, somewhere in an American city, we're not going to name it." And Deagle said, "Oh, it's going to be Seattle. It had been pre-wired with nukes." And Steve Jones says, "Well, we know, there's 9/11 truthers out there, and we know that if this happens, we're going to get people to go in and collect a dust sample, and then they'll send it to us, we'll test it for you." And he was basically proposing that people from the 9/11 truth movement, whatever that is, should go into this city that had been nuked to get a dust sample so that they could send it to him to test. And they would irradiate. Yeah, exactly. But also around the same time, we had Michael Chertoff claiming that he knew that Al-Qaeda had now got nukes and they were going to use them on American soil. And so Judy and I were putting two and two together and
I've looked into the thermite side of it, and I'll be the first one to admit that, like yourself, I was pretty much... I basically said, okay, it looks like thermite, it might have been involved, and knowing a little bit about explosives, these diagonal cut beams look very much like the work of shaped charges and what have you. What would you say to people in that who haven't had the chance to look at all the material?
You're going to take out a saw and cut down the building?
Well, yeah, it doesn't make sense, does it? But,
yeah. But if you
when you blow a building up, you collapse the building, and the building is demolished by it hitting the ground, essentially. They almost always collapse intact, except at the interface where it's hitting the ground, and that's where the rubble and that is created. From the 9/11 footage, that isn't happening, nor is this pancake effect that everybody talked about in the official version, where you would clearly be able to see a process of slamming as they went down. That's not the case. It turns to
I've got another, because of whatever energy field. The cars are just lighting up, all over. Yeah. But think of that much dust going up to the point 100% sunlight is blocked out.
Yeah.
This is it. All these things.
Ring of truth at all, does it?
I noticed somebody's asked about the explosions, and so people have been shown these other little Easter eggs like the squibs coming out. The explosive squibs, which are claimed to be the demolition explosives going off.
Another easy one is, when the dust cloud went up, and it went up. That doesn't happen in controlled demolitions. It went up so much, and it was so fine that it blocked out 100% of the sunlight. And the first responders say it was pitch black. You couldn't see anything until, thank goodness, this car just went into spontaneous combustion. Then we had light.
All right. Just happened to spontaneously combust by being covered in ordinary dust, did it?
No, they just were able to cut through the building. How you bust up the building is you cut it off its foundation and slam it to the ground. There's no seismic signal that indicates it was slammed to the ground.
Well, it doesn't explain why it did. I mean, the most compelling argument I can see, just on bear in mind I've only had a week to research this, is that you can plainly see that the buildings turn to dust and then fall to the ground. Now, if you demolish a building, you can watch 1,000 of them on YouTube.